Welcome, everyone. We're excited to have you join Registrar Corp for what to expect when you're inspected. I'm proud to introduce Fabiola Negron, Registrar Corp's Director of Food Safety, who will be leading this webinar. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Microbiology and graduate coursework in Food Science and Technology from the University of Puerto Rico. Since joining Registrar Corp in 2016, her team has reviewed and developed over 2,000 food safety plans across HACCP, Food Defense, FSVP, etc. for FDA compliance. Throughout this webinar, feel free to write any questions in the Q&A box, and we've saved time at the end to answer them. We'll also follow up with a link to the recording so you can refer back to this at any time. Without any further ado, Fabiola, take it away.
Thank you for the introduction, Alexis. I'm excited to present our last webinar of this four-part series, for food facilities and food safety. Our agenda today will be covering FDA food facility inspection protocols, the top inspection citations for fiscal year 2024, FDA actions, and how to respond to them. At the end, we will have a Q&A session, and you will be able to submit any questions at any time during the webinar. Before we begin into our inspection topics, we want to let you know or remind you of the work that Registrar Corp does. It is likely that for most of you, we have already assisted you with registering your facility with the FDA, or some of you, we may have already helped you with your food safety plans, labels, with import alert petitions. Registrar Corp is the global leader in FDA regulatory compliance, and for over 20 years, we have been assisting companies in the food, supplement, cosmetic, drug, and medical device industries with the FDA requirements. We have assisted over 30,000 clients across 190 countries, and we have about 20 offices worldwide to provide support in your respective time zone and languages. We offer services and software solutions to address your needs, and our specialists are highly qualified and experienced to give you adequate advice and navigate the complexities of FDA requirements with you to help you achieve compliance. We're also ISO 27001 certified to ensure that the data that you share with us is protected. So we thank you for joining us today and for choosing us as your trusted FDA compliance resource. So let's get into our overview of the FDA food facility inspections. Inspections are designed to safeguard public health by evaluating, processing, packing, and holding conditions and activities, ensuring compliance with the FD&C Act laws and regulations, such as with Preventive Controls Rule, with Seafood and Juice HACCP, with food defense requirements, CGMPs for dietary supplements, infant formula, and others. FDA is preventing distribution or importation of unsafe foods. So during those inspections, once they find violations or in any other area of the supply chain, their job is to prevent that food from being distributed further. They also protect public health by issuing enforcement actions for non-compliance, such as 483s, warning letters, import alerts, import refusals, and others. So there are three types of FDA inspection types. There are surveillance inspections, for-cause inspections, and follow-up inspections. So surveillance inspections are regularly scheduled as part of their normal routine. So it's random checks to ensure industry compliance. Now, for-cause inspections, these are triggered either by issues in food safety, such as recalls, outbreaks. It can also be for repeat violations and can be triggered by customer complaints or consumer complaints. Then the follow-up inspections are, once an inspection has been conducted, they will go back and verify that the issues identified in that previous inspection have been resolved. So we get this question a lot. How does FDA decide who they are going to inspect? So the FDA decides inspection priorities based on high risk, current trends, and their data. They assess the risk level of the food. So typically, facilities producing higher risk foods such as ready to eat foods, seafood, cheeses, sprouts, fresh produce, eggs, nut butters, and others are more likely to be prioritized. And these are the foods in the food traceability list, which is the next regulation that the FDA is going to launch for enforcement. So this traceability list has identified these food categories so that industry can have additional records to trace them back. Because due to the recall data, these are the foods that are more higher risk, and that we need to have proper controls in place to make sure that once an issue is identified, we can trace the food back to its source in the least time possible. Then they consider the compliance history. So facilities with a history of violations, like past recalls or enforcement actions, are more likely to be inspected to ensure compliance with corrective measures. Then the facility type and size. Larger facilities, as well as those involved in widespread distribution, may be inspected more frequently due to the potential impact on a larger population. However, this does not mean that smaller facilities will not be inspected. They are inspected all the time. So if you are a small facility, please make sure that you're also prepared, because FDA can show up at any moment during one of their routine inspections. Then there are emerging risks or trends. Facilities producing foods linked to recent outbreaks or contamination issues are prioritized. So data from recalls, outbreaks, or the FDA's reportable food registry may trigger those inspections. We have geographical location. So inspections can also be prioritized for regions where specific risks or issues have been identified, such as high rates of foodborne illnesses or certain agricultural practices. And lastly, consumer complaints. So complaints about specific food products or facilities from consumers, competitors, or employees can also trigger an inspection. So who can inspect my facility for FDA compliance? So the FDA cannot be everywhere all the time. They have limited resources. So they may not always conduct inspections using their own investigators. They may have partnered with state agencies, or they may partner with other officials from foreign countries, via memorandums of understanding, so that other people can work to conduct those inspections on their behalf, or report food safety information per the agreement that they've established. So the FDA investigator, it may be a compliance officer, consumer safety officer, state partners such as the Department of Agriculture here in the United States, health departments, veterinary and health, animal health departments, and then the foreign partners that have memorandums of understanding or other similar agreements to collaborate with food safety information with the FDA. So there are differences between domestic and foreign inspections, but not in the inspection criteria or the requirements. The key difference between domestic and foreign inspections is that domestic, including Puerto Rico, are unannounced. FDA can show up at any time, just knock on the door and start their inspection. So they provide that notice of inspection in person at the time of the inspection. However, for foreign inspections, because there is travel involved, coordinating where they're going to stay, there's coordination on how many facilities they will inspect during their time in that foreign country, then it takes planning in order to conduct those inspections. So those inspections will be announced, and an initial notice of inspection will be sent via email to that facility so that they know and coordinate, first confirm some information we will discuss later on in our next slides. But they need to plan their travel and how the inspections are going to go for that region, so that then they confirm the dates and they plan out, their schedule of inspections. But in any other sense, the inspections are the exact same way. So we will jump into the inspections protocol. So I would like to say that some of these steps, they may happen as an inspection evolves. So this is not necessarily chronological, except for the notice of inspection, which is the start of the inspection, and the closeout meeting. Those don't change. However, the inspector can move the inspection and plan their inspection how they deem appropriate. So the step number 1 is the notice of inspection, and this is a Form 482. The FDA provides this NOI at the start of an inspection. So for domestic, as we mentioned, they will arrive at the facility and provide their credentials in person. And for foreign facilities, they will receive that prior notice via email so that they can plan ahead. So in the case of the foreign inspections, that preliminary NOI is sent. And then it is important to check that the email address that you receive with that NOI is from the FDA domain. So the FDA email domain is at fda.hhs.gov. And that is a way that you can verify the veracity of that email. You must reply to the FDA within 15 days of receiving that notice, acknowledging receipt of that inspection notice. And then that initial email will have attached to it a factory profile. That factory profile must be completed, is a type of questionnaire, and it must be sent back to the FDA. This form will confirm information about the facility, like its name, the location, schedule of operations, number of employees, the food types that are processed. It will ask about specific processing controls that you may have. It will also request you to recommend nearby transportation and hotels for the inspector. It helps them plan the scope of the inspection and make the necessary arrangements to arrive, safely at your facility. So failure to reply to that notice of inspection with the proper information may be interpreted as refusing an inspection. So you want to make sure that the email information that you have provided to the FDA in your food facility registration is up to date. When they send this email, they also copy your US agent. So if you are a foreign facility, you must designate a US agent because they will help with FDA communications. So if you changed your contact, at least the FDA has the contact of the US agent. The US agent's responsibility is to convey that information to you, make sure that you received your NOI, and that you respond within those 5 days. So once you reply to the notice, someone from the FDA's inspection planning branch will contact you to coordinate the inspection dates. This is a period where it may take days, weeks, and we've seen sometimes months for the FDA to reply, and sometimes they may decide at the end to cancel the inspection and not go through with it. So that is up to FDA, judgment. It's again based on the needs or if the area is going to be inspected. So it's really not up to you if the FDA goes and visits, and it's not up to your US agent if the FDA goes visit. They have to make that decision. If the inspection proceeds, then the coordinator will notify you the name of the investigator and their flight information. And inspections may be scheduled around 3 months in advance. So when you get that notice of inspection, it might be 3 months till the time that they actually arrive. So different from the domestic inspections when there's no time to prepare. With foreign inspections, you have that advantage, thankfully, due to the planning phase that is required. So you should take advantage, or if you're not prepared at that time, take advantage of that time to get prepared. When the FDA officer arrives, they will present their credentials and hand the NOI to the facility's operator or owner, operator, or agent in charge of that facility. Refusing inspections can result in a suspended registration, in product seizures, detentions, import alerts, or other legal actions if applicable. So, you must understand that the FDA is part of the United States government, and they are there to ensure that the food distributed in the United States is safe. So once you have registered with the FDA, if we remember from our first webinar, once you register, you are giving permission to the FDA to inspect your facility. So once they arrive at the facility, they will have a quick opening meeting. And the opening meeting will be with, to conduct general introductions and give an opportunity to gather the responsible persons with the FDA investigator. The owner or operator or agent in charge or the most responsible person at the facility must be present, as they are the ones with the most authority at your firm, and there will be official documents that they need to sign. So when the FDA hands the NOI, there is also a form that they're going to have to sign to acknowledge, that they have agreed to let the FDA come and inspect, and other administrative documentation. The FDA investigator will begin to gather information of those present. So they may start documenting who their names are, their titles, and request identification before they proceed. So then during that meeting, they will give a brief description of the scope of the inspection. So explaining the reason for the inspection. It can be routine, follow-up, or surveillance, like we mentioned before. If it was due to an investigation or were there customer complaints, and they will also talk about their legal authority to conduct the inspection. So that's part of the notice of inspection. It includes that language of their authority to be able to inspect you. They will talk about the scope and focus of the inspection, so outlining what the inspection would cover, and they would, tell you how the inspection is going to go, what they are planning to do, and they will identify the roles and responsibilities of those present and identify who their primary contact is during the inspection. So will that be your food safety or quality director at the firm, or manager, or etc. So is it a production manager with the quality inspector? So the main contacts for to accompany the FDA during the inspection are identified at that time. It's important to know that any information provided to the FDA is confidential. They will not share your food safety documentation or other proprietary information. So food formulations or secret formulas, like some of our clients call them, that will not be shared with the general public. During that opening meeting, you will also have an opportunity for questions. You can ask the FDA several questions, but remember that the opening meeting is meant to be brief, because the inspector is going to want to do an initial walk through the facility as soon as possible. They will not be held up in an opening meeting for hours and hours. So they will do those brief introductions, get right to the scope. If you have any questions, they will answer them, and then they will ask to start a walkthrough of the facility. So the first walkthrough is done for the investigator to become familiar with the operation and to plan their inspection strategy. It's important to know that the FDA investigators are advised to follow the firm's sanitation program for employees, such as washing and sanitizing hands or shoes, wearing protective garments, whatever your sanitation protocols are for the employees, the inspector is also expected to follow that. So do not be afraid to inform the investigator of your protocol and ask them to follow it. This is actually a positive observation for you if you do that, because it shows that for visitors in your facility, you are upholding the food safety standards to prevent contamination of foods as they walk around. So it's important that that's the first step, and that can be a potential first observation if you don't ask the inspector to follow those protocols. So that's a little tidbit there. A walkthrough is the visual inspection of the manufacturing site, and it will be helpful to confirm for the inspector what the depth of the inspection is going to be. Initially, you will complete that initial factory profile, and they may have an idea of which foods or processes they might want to see. However, once they get to the facility is really when they'll see and observe and sort of decide which areas or which processes they are going to inspect. So they are going to ask some general questions. They want to learn about the products, excuse me, and the processes that are happening, and they will identify sources of manufacturing records and identify potential areas of concern. They also take that first glance into your employees' practices and the overall operations. So it's important that you already have those procedures in place to make sure that the employees follow basic GMPs, the employee hygiene protocols, because that's the first thing that the FDA is going to notice during that initial walkthrough. Then the FDA, once they've determined, okay, these are the products that I want to inspect, or this is the process that is taking place, I want to see this process, then they are going to begin requesting documentation. Know that the FDA has the authority to request and access your records, especially when there is reasonable belief that a food is adulterated or poses a health risk. So the facilities are required to provide these records promptly upon request during the inspection. The specific records requested will depend on your operations and the type of food, within the scope of the inspection and the purpose of the inspection routine. Of the inspection. The records may include any of these, so food safety, HACCP plans, your supply chain program, sanitation records, food defense plans, anything related to the processing of that food and the employee practices. It can include employee training. It can include SOPs for sanitation. It can include, batch production records or CCP, preventive control monitoring records. So please, you have to make sure that beforehand you have a solid food safety system and solid documentation to be able to provide that to the FDA, evidencing, the control measures that you have at your facility are appropriate. So once they've reviewed that, and this is where I said things can flip around however the inspector feels that, it's appropriate to conduct the inspection, but they can do more documents review or stop the inspection and go back. So it just depends on what they want to achieve. But let's say step number 5 is the official facility inspection. So that is, a structured and thorough walkthrough of the facility. And it is intended to identify the risks and ensure that the food products are produced in a safe and sanitary manner before reaching the consumers. So it will have, excuse me, it will have a detailed examination of specific areas. So they will be observing how the food products are processed, handled, and packaged. They will be checking for proper implementation of the preventive controls or CCPs, allergen management, sanitation practices, etc. They can check storage areas, so inspecting storage conditions, if allergens are stored separately or in a safe way to prevent allergen cross contact, ensuring proper temperature controls, stock rotation, pest control. They will also check facility infrastructure, so they will be examining the walls, the floors, the ceilings to make sure that they are in good repair. they are not contributing to contamination of the food products. They will be inspecting the lighting, ventilation, water supply, all of these things that might impact food safety. They will be observing the employee practices, so the personnel's behavior. They will monitor if the employees are following the GMPs, if they are following the hygiene protocols. Are they washing their hands? Are they wearing their protective garments like hairnets or the booties for for the shoes? Are they taking food into the production area, or are they storing personal items next to the food? So those are things that the FDA will be checking. They will also be conducting employee interviews so they can speak with the workers and try to understand their roles, have them explain what their activities are and how they conduct them. And they will also check their knowledge of food safety practices. So it's important, the employee training program, it's not a one-time thing. You need to do refreshers, make sure that your team members understand their roles at their specific stations, throughout production, that they understand the sanitation protocols or employee hygiene protocols, because the FDA may ask questions about their activities and how they conduct them. Environmental and product sampling. It can include collection of samples, so collecting product, ingredient, or environmental samples for laboratory testing. They will focus on high-risk areas, so they will pay particular attention where cross-contamination or pathogen growth is likely, such as in ready-to-eat food zones. So it's important that you have those protocols for sanitation, for cleaning and sanitation up to date, and that they're appropriate. Then they will review the records and procedures on site. They may take monitoring records with them and see if your employees are actually following the protocols. So if you determine that the metal detector is checked every hour, the FDA inspector might actually check if that is being done at the hour. So if you have procedures in place, that's the procedure that the FDA inspector is expecting to find when they go and check that production line at the time of the inspection. Also, there will be ongoing communication. So the inspector is going to be asking that main point of contact information on production, information about the process, ask information about the food safety of that food or food safety protocols. So it's important that the person that you designate is knowledgeable, understands the procedures and the operations, so that they can answer all these questions, or have accessible, the person that is in charge of specific areas, so the FDA inspector can get those answers. And as they go, they will begin sharing some preliminary observations. So if your employee came in, they didn't wash their hands and they just got to work, the FDA inspector might say, okay, I am observing that that employee did not wash their hands. What is the reason? They might start requesting you to give an explanation of why certain protocols are not being followed, and give you an opportunity to explain. So as they go along, they will also be documenting those observations, taking notes. They might take photographs of any non-compliances or potential violations. So if we remember from the opening meeting slide, we discussed that all information taken or shared with the FDA is going to be confidential. So they're not going to post your processing plant pictures on the internet, or they're not going to share that with the general public. So it's important that you cooperate to the best of your ability to make sure they compile their evidence to do their reports. And the FDA inspector, when they are doing this walkthrough, they are not going to note every single observation for you. They are going to have verbal discussions about minor nonconformances, but their focus will primarily be on critical observation. So they will highlight significant issues that could affect public health, such as evidence of contamination or inadequate temperature controls and others. So we see that, within that inspection, their key focus is going to be cleanliness and sanitation, and the conditions of the processing facility storage areas. They are going to focus on potential for cross contamination or cross contact, and they're also going to focus on compliance with the applicable FDA regulations, so FSMA and HACCP or other GMPs as applicable to your products. Once they have conducted the inspection, they have reviewed the information, they have taken their notes, compiled their evidence, then they will have a closeout meeting with the company's management. So they will discuss any significant findings and concerns and leave a written report of any conditions or practices which, in the investigator's judgment, indicate objectionable conditions. So the list of observations will be in an inspectional observations form called an FDA Form 483. So inspectional observations is the equivalent of an FDA Form 483. The investigator may provide, like I mentioned earlier, some verbal observations if they found any minor compliance concerns, but they will talk those over with you. But they will provide written observations for the significant compliance concerns, for which the facility then has to provide corrective actions. So some corrective actions may already may have been taken, because throughout the inspection of the facility, the inspector might have already told you, yeah, that employee did not wash their hands. So your corrective action was to tell the employee. You might have scheduled a refresher training on the hygiene protocol. So that is an appropriate corrective action for that type of observation. But they may have said, you do not have hand washing facilities near, in an appropriate area for employees to wash their hands. So that is a corrective action that's going to take a little bit more time, because it may take some planning. So there are corrective actions that you can already start working on or take at the time of the inspection. And, the FDA can note, okay, active corrective action was taken, and they will make note of that. So when the FDA has those significant observations and hands that 483 to you, you will have 15 days to respond with the appropriate corrective actions taken. So like we mentioned, there might be some observations that are easy to fix or quick in order to determine the corrective actions, but there are others that might take some time or may require you to meet with other, stakeholders in the firm to make proper decisions about the corrective actions. So if you need to change a process, if you need to purchase new equipment, if you need to change the design of your facility, then those are things that take more time and take, other decisions that might be beyond your particular control. But yes, you will have 15 days to formulate your response. And it's important to know that the 483 is not meant to be corrective actions are not meant to resolve the problem within the 15 days. The FDA understands that some issues might take a long time to get resolved. So you will present them your plan. Okay, we decided that we were going to install sinks with proper water quality and temperature next to the production area, right adjacent to the production floor, so that when employees come in, they can wash their hands and sanitize their hands before they go to work. So that is something that is going to take some planning, and it's going to take some time as somebody goes and installs that at your facility. But having the evidence, we've contacted this person, they're going to install our sink. Here is the receipt. Here is where the sink is going to be located. So if you can provide that detailed information, that is a proper corrective action form. But we will, corrective action response, but we will go into a little bit more detail in other slides about corrective actions. So within that closeout meeting, we're still in the closeout meeting. They have handed you that 483. You are going over potential corrective actions, but and the inspector can provide some guidance or FDA regulatory references so that to guide you on what actions you could take. So they might say, oh, here is an FDA guidance. It explains this, or hey, look at this regulation. This is where you can find what the requirements are. But the closeout meeting is not a negotiation for you to question or go into a back and forth with the FDA on why they gave you that observation. So the inspector will explain, they will give you that observation. But if you have any concerns, then your corrective action, that is where you will explain, yes, we took these actions, or hey, here's our validation study proving that our process is actually accurate. So that is where you will collect your evidence and demonstrate to the FDA that you have proper measures in place. And then lastly, after that closeout meeting, the FDA inspector leaves. They will not return if everything is good. However, they will also draft an establishment inspection report. This is a detailed report where they will give a narrative of what happened throughout the inspection. So here we show an example of the table of contents of what an establishment inspection report may have for a food inspection. So it can have the summary, the administrative data, that is, the general information of your company, of the people that were present, their titles. So everybody you introduced to the FDA during that meeting, they might be mentioned in that administrative data section. The history of the company. So have you had issues with the FDA before, or have you had any recalls, even if you're in your country or for other countries? So the history of your facility and your products, interstate commerce, individual responsibility and persons interviewed, the firm's training program. So employee training is a key factor in food safety. If you don't train your employees, they don't know what to do. They might contaminate the food. They might not implement preventive controls in the appropriate way. So employee training is a key area that the FDA inspectors focus on, and they will, make notes of the thoroughness of your training program. The manufacturing and design operations, so they will describe what they observed and the conditions of your facility. Manufacturing codes, sanitation, was there proper sanitation protocols in place? They will make observations about your hazard analysis, your HACCP or food safety plans, environmental monitoring, pest control is a big one, complaints, recalls, and procedures, objectionable conditions. So that is where they will note the observations they listed in your 483. And they will also, mention any samples that they have collected throughout the inspection, what they generally discuss with you in the closeout meeting. So it's from start to finish, all the activities that the inspector engaged in, and describe your food safety practices, what they observed. And they will compile all that information into a comprehensive report, which is then submitted to FDA supervisory staff to determine what is your inspection classification. So once you received if you received a 483, because it can go well, it can go and you can pass with flying colors if you had everything in order. However, the inspection report and the investigators in descriptions and observations, that is going to be evaluated by another FDA person, and they will then help determine what is the inspection classification, whether was no action indicated, voluntary action indicated, or official action indicated. And please know that it can take from 3 to 6 months to receive this comprehensive report due to that review process and determining, whether what inspection classification to issue. I don't believe I mentioned FDA inspections food inspections take 2 to 5 days to complete. It all depends on the scope of the inspection, how large the facility is, what is the processing type that the FDA is evaluating. So it just depends on the scope and also the purpose. So if there are significant issues related to a recall or an outbreak, the FDA might be there for even longer. So it's important that you are aware that, that might vary from 2 to 5 days. So once you receive your results, we mentioned you could get a no action indicated, voluntary action indicated, or official action indicated. So these, if you receive, this is like the grading system for the FDA. And if you receive a no action indicated, this means that there were no significant violations found, that the firm appears to be compliant, and you are passing the inspection with no further actions required. So if you get a no action indicated, it's possible that the FDA inspector may have discussed some minor compliance issues with you, but nothing worth noting in a 483. So you might still have some observations, but they're quickly taken care of. They might not present a risk to public safety. So the FDA inspector might have just had a general discussion at the end. Then we have the voluntary action indicated, which violations were observed and a 483 was issued requesting voluntary corrective actions. Voluntary means that the FDA is giving you an opportunity to reply with corrective actions. They are not taking official action against you right at that moment. They're giving you that 15-day period to go back with your team and discuss the corrective actions, put them together, and present them to them. But a voluntary action indicated, if you're able to submit your corrective actions and they're good, this is still a pass. This is still a pass of the inspection. However, you must, if you did receive a 483, you must provide those corrective actions to the FDA, so then they can conclude that yes, you took the appropriate corrective actions, and they will move on. The FDA may do a follow-up to verify that the corrective actions were taken, or they may just decide to wait for another inspection. It just depends on the violations that were observed, but failure to take that corrective action may result in further regulatory action, such as receiving a warning letter or an OAI in a following inspection. So we've seen many cases that our clients may not take the 483 seriously, or they may just think, oh, we received this observation, but we really didn't understand what we had to do. So it's important that you know that within those 15 days, you must reply with your corrective actions, because a few months later, you may receive a warning letter stating, on December 12th, we issued a 483. We gave you 15 days to respond. However, you did not respond to the 483. We are therefore issuing this warning letter, and you must take action to fix X, Y, and Z. So they will reiterate that you did not take that opportunity to present your corrective actions, and they will escalate the situation. And lastly, we have official action indicated, in which significant violations were identified or a firm failed to fix previous compliance concerns, where a 483 was issued, and corrective actions in this case for official action indicated are mandatory. So it's a more severe, it's a step up from a voluntary issues in voluntary action indicated. And if the issues are not resolved, it it can again escalate to more serious enforcement actions. Again, a warning letter, but they may issue a product recall. They may request suspend your registration. They may put you on import alert if objectionable conditions are serious enough to, detain shipments from being imported, or they can, for domestic facilities, they might stop you from distributing your food. So it's important that we take these classifications seriously and act immediately upon receiving them to gather the people, that need to be gathered in order to compile the evidence, do the planning, uh, you know, plan that path forward into taking the proper corrective actions. So now we will discuss the top FDA citations for fiscal year 2024. This was taken directly from the FDA's inspections compliance dashboard. And, it includes FSBP, which is not covered in this webinar series, as we focus on the food facilities, but the 11.2% all the way around from right to left, they're all associated with food facilities. So I just put this graph here because it has the regulatory citations for the 21 CFR, so the regulations, so you can find them on your own time. But we have taken the top 5 citations from this graph. So we have grouped in the general areas or topics in which the FDA, issued the most citations for fiscal year 2024. And you will note that most of these are GMP violations. Manufacturing and processing, packing or holding controls, personnel, sanitary operations, and equipment and utensils are all part of GMPs. And we discussed in previous webinars that the GMPs are the basic requirements every facility must have to have a solid food safety foundation in which they build their food safety programs on. So if you're lacking in GMPs, having a food safety plan with all the appropriate control measures is not going to be enough. So it's important that we give special attention to GMPs as well as the food safety plan. So at number 1, we have the manufacturing, processing, packing, or holding controls. And the citation is specific to not conducting operations under conditions that control contamination, pathogen growth, and allergen cross contact. So that is the number 1 observation. And, it might be related to different things as we see as different areas. It could be the processing, packing, or holding it within a facility. So it's important that those basic GMPs during those, in those areas of your operation are up to par with FDA requirements. At number 2, we have personnel, and this is related to personnel practices being inadequate. They were likely not following basic GMPs related to hygiene practices, availability of hand washing facilities or wearing protective clothing, the employee hygiene and illness controls, or other cross-contamination risks. So they were likely doing something that can contribute to contamination of the food. So that's where the employee training and then enforcing those protocols is important, because you can train all year long, but if there's no consequences for not meeting those protocols or not executing those protocols, then you're really not implementing those programs in an appropriate way. It won't be taken seriously. So number 3, sanitary operations related to plant maintenance and sanitation. So you did not maintain your plant in a clean and sanitary condition and inadequate repair. You did not clean and sanitize your utensils or equipment in a manner that protected against allergen cross contact and contamination. Again, sanitation is a basic requirement in a plant facility. If you are not cleaning, you are putting your product at risk, and it doesn't matter how many controls you have in place. If you've already pasteurize the product, but the equipment later on is not properly sanitized and clean, or the area in which you stored the packaging materials was unclean, you're contaminating your product again. So it doesn't matter the control that you already put, if it was adequate, if it was validated, if it was sufficient to make that product safe for consumption. If later on it's going to get contaminated, then you have a big sanitation issue. So it's important that you take action and that you have a proper program in place and that it is followed. Sometimes we may get caught up on the production and getting product out faster, and it's important that we do take those stops to clean and sanitize equipment to make sure that what we're producing is safe. Number 4, the hazard analysis. In the hazard analysis, specifically, the identification of hazards was deficient. So in hazards that required a preventive control. So you must have a preventive controls qualified individual, if you're subject to the preventive controls rule, to develop your hazard analysis and your food safety plan. It is important that in addition to having taken that training, that that person is knowledgeable in where to find the hazards that FDA has identified for specific foods, so that they are considered in the food safety plan. And when FDA inspects or verifies, then they know that you've considered all the potential hazards and made proper assessments of which of those hazards required a preventive control. We see a lot that some companies may identify baking steps, for example, as a prerequisite or not identify them as a CCP. So those are things that the FDA will question. And yeah, just make sure that you are following the preventive controls in this particular observation, in this case, and that you have appropriate PCQIs to conduct those hazard analysis. And if you need help, well, that's what we're here for. We also, our team is full, all of our team members are PCQIs and are capable of identifying hazards that FDA will expect to see in your food safety plans, given our experience with FDA requirements. So it is very important that the hazard analysis is appropriate, because if it is lacking, the FDA will make note of it, and it might result. This is a very, very significant violation. Then number 5, equipment and utensils, plant design and maintenance. So your equipment and utensils were not designed and constructed to be adequately cleaned or maintained to protect against allergen cross-contact and contamination. Equipment could have hard to reach areas like cracks or seams, or where allergens or other contaminants can accumulate and makes it hard to remove. There's also a requirement for food equipment to have smooth, cleanable surfaces. This is required in the GMPs. Again, this is another GMP violation. And as it pertains to inadequate maintenance, it can be broken, worn, or corroded equipment that is difficult to clean effectively, and equipment that's not regularly maintained that can lead to potential contamination risks. So these are the top FDA citations for fiscal year 2024. Since forever, the top violations have been due to lack of good manufacturing practices, which is supposed to be the basic requirements for every food facility to have. So, please, take time to review those procedures. And sometimes the procedures are great, but what is lacking is that personnel is not following the procedures. They're not being implemented. So it's important to know it's not just have great documentation, it's also the execution of what that documentation is established. So now, once you've received FDA action, how do you respond to that? Like, what type of FDA actions are there? So we have, as we discussed, the 483s and warning letters, which are tied it can be mostly tied to those inspections. However, warning letters can be issued without an official inspection. If FDA verifies a website and sees claims, for example, this happens a lot with dietary supplements. They find your dietary supplement on your website and they see that you have made certain claims about that dietary supplement curing infections, or curing your cold, or any other illness. It helps with diabetes. So those types of claims are reserved for a drug product. So dietary supplements are not meant to cure or prevent diseases or illnesses. They are meant to support overall wellness, overall health, not a specific um, illness or disease. So if a claim has not been uh, previously, I don't want to use the word approved, but accepted, then it might be considered a drug claim, and the FDA can issue warning letters for information on your website or information on your label that misleads the consumers into thinking that that dietary supplement is going to cure their diseases. Then we move to import alerts. So import alerts, we've discussed these in our previous webinar. So if you also want to take a look at that in more detail, but the import alerts are when significant violations have occurred. Let's say you've had multiple import refusals already, or the FDA issued an inspection and noticed you have an OAI. These are objectionable conditions. They can place you on import alert immediately to prevent you from importing your product to the United States. And they will detain that, and you will have to submit an official petition in order for FDA to review and remove you from import alert. So once you're on import alert, you will not be able to export that product for that product to be accepted into the United States. Then there are mandatory recalls. So we had, if the FDA notices objectionable conditions that require a recall of your product, but you refuse to conduct a recall, the FDA can mandate a recall to be issued. Or if they're under an investigation and they have found, that the product, it continues to be distributed and affect public health or impact public health in a negative way, they will issue a mandatory recall. They can issue a suspension of registration. So they just suspend the FFR, the food facility registration, and you are no longer able to distribute products in the United States or import them because you're not registered with them anymore. And then civil and criminal charges. That happens less frequently, but it's still an option for our government to take action against those facilities that are putting the consumers at risk. So because we're talking about inspections specifically, we wanted to just go over how to respond to 483s or warning letters, which are typically the immediate actions that can be issued during an inspection, the most likely. So once you receive these documents, the first step is to review the FDA's observations very carefully. You want to understand what the FDA is asking of you and what they observed. So you want to make sure that you understand it fully so then you can address the problem. You can't go right into corrective actions when you don't understand the full scope of the problem. Then you should get together with your team. You should go over these documents with your team to involve the necessary personnel that have the expertise to help you identify a root cause, so that you can find adequate solutions together. And when you're finding solutions, FDA is not looking for a band-aid, for a temporary fix. They are looking for something that is permanent, that will permanently reduce or prevent the problem from happening again. So it's important that you identify the root cause, and then when you formulate your corrective action plan, you are addressing the issues in a permanent way. When you formulate your corrective action plan, you will have to be specific on the type of actions, controls that you are going to put in place. And when you are determining that, you also have to assess what you will be doing, how it will be done, by when it will be done, and who. So, please, when you formulate that plan, you need to be specific about what is happening and when it's going to be done. Like I mentioned, those 15 days to respond also apply to a warning letter. If the action is going to take longer, you can put in your action plan. We expect this, we need to install a sink. The person is coming next week and they will have it done by the following week. So that is my timeline. So you have specifics. Um, you must compile supporting evidence. So that evidence can include pictures and can include receipts, new monitoring records, sampling and testing, evidence that you bought new equipment, evidence that you have a new pest control program or that you hired a new pest control service, or whatever the observation is, you must have adequate and appropriate evidence to demonstrate to the FDA that the actions have been taken or that they are in progress. So in having your action plan, compiling the evidence, now is the time that you draft that response to the FDA. You must list the observations that the FDA noted, and below the observation, you will write how it was fixed or how you are planning on fixing it, and make reference to any evidence or records that you will attach to that corrective action response. So it's important that you have that organized and that your description of your corrective actions is clear and concise. We don't want to use a lot of words or make it very fancy. You must draft that letter in a way that it's easy for the FDA officer to understand and that it addresses the issue that they observed. So if you are struggling with your response, if you have had a 483 recently or a warning letter, you can also get expert help. So because you have 15 days to respond, if you are not sure what to do, I would recommend you to act immediately and hire an expert. Registrar Corp also assists in writing and helping draft 483s, corrective actions and corrective actions for warning letters for our clients. And we will guide you along the way and make recommendations of what type of supporting evidence you may add to that response to be clear to the FDA, and not leave any vague information so that the FDA might think you're not addressing the issues properly. So we have reached the end of our presentation. Now we will move along to the Q&A session. And we remind you that when you log out of this webinar, that we have a short 5-question survey, and we ask you to please fill that out so that we can gather the necessary details from you and find out if the webinar was useful, if you have any recommendations for improvement. Like, we want to make sure that these webinars are useful and helpful to you. And, we want to make sure that they're effective in informing you and giving you the information and the FDA guidance that you're looking for. So I'm just going to search over here. We remind you the presentation will be emailed, a copy of the recording. So if you registered or if you attended, you are going to receive a copy of the recording. If the inspector wants to leave with a copy of your food safety plan, are you able to decline? So that is part of the records that they're going to review. Like we mentioned, these documents are going to be kept confidential. So I don't recommend declining providing that information as it's part of their investigation. And they may not be able to review all of the documentation on site. They might, you know, go back and continue evaluating certain information, you know, as necessary. When searching in the FDA dashboard, if a facility does not show up, does it mean it has not been registered with FDA, or does it mean they haven't had any FDA inspection, but could still be registered with the FDA? That's a great question, Penelope. So yes, the second. So not appearing in the dashboard just means that the FDA has not taken any action to they haven't been inspected or they haven't issued any regulatory action. So there's just no FDA history for that particular facility. But that does not mean that they're not registered. The FDA dashboard works with the FEI's Facility Establishment Identifier, or FDA Establishment Identifier, sorry. And they, if they have an inspection, the FDA will issue an FEI number. But the FDA dashboard, you cannot search by facility registration because those numbers are confidential. Does FDA provide official closeout and inspection or corrective actions? The FDA, they, I'm not sure I understand the question. They have a closeout meeting where they delineate uh, what the observations of that inspection were, but for the inspection classification, it will go to other FDA supervisory staff. So they evaluate the observations and the report, and then they decide what the inspection classification is. So you will see that in the once you receive a copy of the establishment inspection report, that is when you will receive the official inspection classification. And that information will also be published in the FDA data dashboard. If swabs or samples are taken by FDA, are they required to disclose what they are testing for? They will tell you. I don't believe it's a secret of what there's no reason to be secretive about that information. They will tell you, yes, I'm taking swabs. This is environmental sampling. For environmental sampling, they may be testing for salmonella, listeria. So if they are sampling product, then whatever hazards are associated with that food, that may be the type of pathogenic bacteria that they're searching for. Or if they are looking for pesticide residues, they will let you know. They might also collect samples of labels and have the FDA's labeling team verify the compliance of your labels. Not every inspector is an expert on labeling checks, so they might have to take some samples and send those samples to other staff to check the compliance of your labels, for example. Hassan asked, if notified by a vendor of a recall for a distributed product from the vendor and has notified the FDA of the recall, should we notify the FDA? Yes. No. So if your manufacturer has already notified the FDA, you don't have to notify the FDA because it's the same recall. But if you are issuing a recall on your own, then yes, you should definitely let FDA know as soon as possible. So the action is the manufacturer is the primary person responsible for carrying out the recall. You can definitely and are expected to collaborate because you distributed the product further. So the responsibility of the manufacturer is to notify all their consignees, and then all their consignees can notify their consignees and so forth. So yes, you can definitely help in retrieving that product because you will then notify who has received the product. If you're sending it directly to consumers, then if it has reached the consumers, it might be a conversation with your manufacturer so they also notify the general public about the recall. So the FDA has guidelines on how recalls can be informed to the public, and they have specific examples of how you can do those public announcements, and the FDA will post them on their website so that the general public is aware that the recall is happening, and reaching out to consumers as best as possible to prevent them from consuming the product, or prevent just throw it away if they haven't yet. Okay. So Penelope asks, after a facility submitted corrective actions, will FDA provide an official response that the corrective actions are accepted? Yes, they will review that, and then they will send like a closeout letter, or not necessarily for warning letters. They do a closeout letter. For corrective actions, they might just send another note type of notification saying that the corrective actions were acceptable and that there's no further action needed. Or if they were unacceptable, they will also notify you, and they may say, it might escalate to a warning letter, or they may just ask for more clarification on certain areas of the response. It depends on what it's up to the inspector's discretion. So Hassan sends a follow-up question about the recall, even if we are packing the product into our own label. So if you're repacking is not necessarily identified as a manufacturing activity. If that product is open to the environment, then yes, then you are considered a manufacturer. But if you're only packing product that was already prepackaged into another packaging, then you're not considered an official manufacturer. You're just repacking. So it just depends who's responsible for that product. The FDA, you can work together with that manufacturer to make sure that the product that you distributed is recalled properly. Once registered for inspection and submitted documents, can we revise documents before FDA inspection at the facility? So once you register with the FDA, they're not going to immediately inspect you. It's not likely. I won't say never, because it can happen. They can decide, oh, this is a big manufacturer, high risk food, let's just inspect them. But that's not typically how it goes. It can take a while. But once you register, you are giving them permission. So there can be different issues. If you happen to, it doesn't take an inspection for FDA to reach out to you, because if your product was stopped at the port for a routine sample, it can happen. They might find an issue there. And if you don't have your food safety controls in place and your food safety plans and your documents in place, then that is going to escalate into more problems with the FDA. So once you register, know that you must be FDA compliant in all the sense. Compliant labels, compliant food safety protocols, compliant GMPs, everything should be in the way that the FDA expects, so that you can protect the US consumers and they see that you are in compliance, whatever the case may be. If it's a facility inspection, if it's problems at the port, if it's your FSBP importer, your importer in the United States must have a foreign supplier verification program, and it is their responsibility to ensure that they are importing only from approved suppliers that are in compliance with FDA regulations. So your importer might be the one finding out that you have issues with food safety first, than before the FDA even inspects you. And that's why that rule was set in motion, so that importers have that additional add an additional layer of protection before foods are being distributed in the United States. If the facility faced FDA inspection and were issued a 483, will the on-water containers be rejected and discarded at destination, or can the facility get the containers back? Good question, Satish. So no, when you're issued a 483, you are being given an opportunity to respond. The FDA won't detain your shipments because you received a 483. You are still considered compliant enough and you are given an opportunity to fix those issues that were observed. If those issues impacted the shipments on the water, let's say the FDA stated that they found listeria and you suspect that those shipments have listeria, then you must take action to retrieve or stop that product so that it's not distributed further. So whoever's receiving your product in the United States, you must alert them that you are recalling that product. Recalling internally because it hasn't been distributed to the public yet. But the FDA expects you to take those actions. They are not going to assume that that product has listeria if they don't know, if they didn't find that information. But you must then act accordingly if you do find out during those root cause analysis and the corrective action plan and said, oops, I think we produced this product during this time, we suspect it has listeria, you should bring it back. But the FDA won't stop it at the port. Let's see, are there any other questions? I believe I've answered all of them. I will give you 30 seconds. Oh, I found one that I missed. So Jao Padro asked, is the inspection usually carried out in this order? First the initial walkthrough, then the record inspection, and only the facility inspection? Does it usually take more than 1 day? Inspections take 2 to 5 days. So 2 is the minimum because at the first day, they will do that opening meeting. They will do a general walkthrough to get familiarized with the operations, and then they will request records, and that can take time back and forth, more questions about the process. So it does take time, and to review all those records and their adequacy takes time. But then the second day, they might do the official FDA inspection where they're looking into specific areas to to note down the observations and carry out the official inspection. But since the walkthrough, they are already taking notes and making observations. They can do that. And again, it can be a combination. It doesn't have to be step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It can be, I check these records. Oh, I want to go back to the facility and check this particular process. It just depends on how the inspector works and what they want to observe. Oh, I found. Jesse Lord asks, what documents or records do not need to be shared with an investigator? So the FDA investigator is trained to solicit the records related to food safety. So they are going to be very careful about the records that they request. And yes, the records they request might have proprietary information, might have formulation information that you typically don't share with other people, but understand that these are government officials. This is not like a third party audit or a client coming that you might not want to share that information because it's confidential. It is the FDA. And once you agreed to inspection with registering with FDA, then they have the authority to request the food safety related records. So they're not going to ask for information that is beyond the scope of their investigation. Okay. So Genoa asks, for a warehouse facility storing third-party food, beverage, and cosmetics products, what supplier verification documents will the FDA inspector want to see as part of an inspection? So if you're only storing food and cosmetics, well, cosmetics, I wouldn't know. I am the food safety expert. So for cosmetics, I might not know if they have other verification requirements for storage, but for as it pertains to food, you are not required to verify if you are only storing product for someone else, because you're not engaging in manufacturing and processing, and um, you're not in control of the hazards. The FDA will expect the manufacturer and the FSBP importer on record to have the supplier verification program and the food safety plan. So if you're only storing product for someone else, you're not the owner of the food, then you would not be considered an FSBP importer, and you do not have to have those supplier verification records for food safety. Now, as a warehouse facility, what you would be required to have, it could be the traceability records. So if you're storing foods on the traceability list, there are certain records that a receiving facility is going to have to maintain, because once you distribute that product, if it is the cause of a recall, you're going to be one of the points that the FDA is going to identify as having touched that product. So they will trace back to you, trace back to your supplier or to your clients that asked you to hold the food. So it will be, part of that map to lead the FDA to where the food originated from. And of course, you would have to follow GMPs because you're storing food. So pest control, those basic GMPs for sanitation, just to keep the food safe. All those basic requirements would apply. I think I did get them all right now. So I appreciate you joining and sticking around for the question and answer portion of the webinar. We hope that it was useful and helpful information, and that you consider us for your FDA compliance needs in the future. So thank you so much, and have a lovely rest of the week. Bye.